The humidity in Oak Creek was heavy on the morning of my wedding. I remember the smell of the old wooden pews in the church and the sound of my mother's frantic breathing as she tried to fix my hair. For months, our kitchen had been a factory of white lace and silk ribbons. We weren't rich. My father was a mechanic whose hands were permanently stained with oil, and my mother worked at the local grocery store. But for one day, they wanted me to feel like a princess. Mark was the only man I had ever loved. We met when we were 10. He had fallen off his bike, and I was the one who cleaned his scraped knee with my water bottle. Since that day, we were inseparable. We shared dreams of leaving Oak Creek, but my dreams involved us building a home together, while his dreams, I later realized, were only about escaping the dust of a small town. "You look beautiful, Lily," my mother whispered, her eyes red from crying. She smoothed the skirt of the dress she had spent 200 hours sewing. I smiled, but my hands were shaking. I had a strange feeling in my stomach, like a cold stone sitting where my heart should be. Mark hadn't called me the night before. I told myself he was just nervous. Everyone said grooms get nervous. The music started, a slow, traditional melody played on a piano that was slightly out of tune. My father took my arm. His suit was a bit too tight and he smelled like peppermint and motor oil. "Ready, Peanut?" he asked. "Ready, Dad," I replied. We began the walk. The church was full of faces I had known my entire life. Neighbors, teachers, the mailman, they were all smiling, waiting to see the happy couple. But when we reached the altar, it was empty. The priest looked confused. The best man, Mark's brother Toby, was staring at his phone, his face turning a ghostly shade of white. He looked up and saw me. The pity in his eyes was worse than a physical blow. He walked toward us, tripping over his own feet, and handed my father a note. I didn't wait for my father to read it. I snatched it from his hand. The paper was expensive, much nicer than the paper we used at home. It had the logo of a big law firm in the city. "Lily, I'm sorry. I thought I could be the man you wanted, but I realized I can't breathe in Oak Creek. Vanessa's father offered me a position I can't refuse. It's a life of power and influence. I can't take a mechanic's daughter into that world. It would hold me back. Please don't try to find me. I've already moved my things. Goodbye, Mark." The world didn't end with a bang. It ended with a quiet, hollow thud. I felt the eyes of 200 people on my back. I could hear the whispers starting. He left her. Poor Lily. I knew he was too ambitious for this town. I didn't faint. I didn't scream. I simply turned around and walked out. I walked past my crying mother, past my angry father, and out into the hot afternoon sun. I walked until my feet bled in my white satin shoes. I reached the bridge over Blackwood Creek and took the engagement ring, a tiny diamond he had saved for a year to buy, and threw it as hard as I could into the water. "I am not a trap," I whispered to the empty air. "And I am not just a mechanic's daughter. I left Oak Creek that same night. I didn't take the car my father had repaired for me. I didn't want anything that reminded me of home. I took a bus with a single suitcase and my life savings, $1,200. I arrived in Seattle 3 days later. The city was gray, loud, and uncaring. It was perfect. In Seattle, nobody knew Lily Miller, the girl who was left at the altar. I was just another face in the rain. I found a room in a boarding house that smelled of old soup and damp carpets. My first job was cleaning a 24-hour gym. I would arrive at 11 p.m. and scrub floors until 7 a.m. The work was hard, and the chemicals made my eyes sting, but the physical pain was a distraction from the hole in my chest. After my cleaning shift, I would go to a diner and work as a waitress until 2 p.m. I lived on the leftover crusts of bread and the tips I made from tired truck drivers. I was exhausted, but every night before I went to sleep, I would look at a picture of a computer. Mark thought I was simple. He thought I was small town. So I decided to master the one thing he always struggled with: technology. I bought a used, broken laptop for $50 and taught myself how to fix it using books from the library. Then I taught myself how to code. I spent my nights in the dark, my face lit by the blue glow of the screen. I was learning a new language, a language of logic and numbers where everything had a place and nothing happened without a reason. Unlike love, code was predictable. If there was a mistake, you could find it and fix it. 3 months into my new life, the sickness started. At first, I thought it was the cheap food or the lack of sleep. I would be scrubbing a treadmill and suddenly have to run to the bathroom. I sat on the cold floor of the gym bathroom, counting the days on my fingers. My heart stopped. June 14th, the night before the wedding. We had stayed up late, talking about our future, and we had been careless. We were supposed to be married the next day. We thought we had forever. I bought a test from the pharmacy with the last $10 in my purse. I sat on my bed in the boarding house watching the minutes tick by on my cheap watch. 2 lines. I fell to my knees. "No," I sobbed into my pillow. "Not now, not his." I looked at the phone. I knew Mark's new number. Toby had sent it to me in a text message I never answered. I could call him. I could tell him he was going to be a father. He was a billionaire's protege now. He had the money to help. But then I saw his letter in my mind. I can't take a mechanic's daughter into that world. It would hold me back. If I told him about the baby, he wouldn't see a son. He would see a bill. He would see a mistake. He would think I was trying to blackmail him into coming back. "I don't want a man who stays because he has to," I said to the empty room. I rubbed my stomach. "I don't want him to ever touch you if he doesn't want me." I went to work that night, and the next night, and the next. I worked until my stomach grew too big to hide. I wore oversized sweaters and lied to my boss, saying I was just eating too much. Leo was born on a Tuesday. I had worked a double shift at the diner and my water broke while I was mopping the floor. I walked myself to the hospital because I couldn't afford an ambulance. The labor was 20 hours of agony. Every time a nurse asked, "Is the father coming?" I had to shake my head. I felt the eyes of the doctors on me, the poor, single mother. I saw the pity again. When Leo was finally placed in my arms, I didn't see Mark. I saw a miracle. He had a tiny tuft of dark hair and the most beautiful green eyes I had ever seen. He reached out and grabbed my thumb with his whole hand. "I've got you," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "It's just you and me. We're going to be okay." I returned to work 10 days after he was born. I had no choice. I found a neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, who agreed to watch him for $5 an hour. I would work, run home to feed him, and run back to work. But the fire in me was growing. I wasn't just working to survive anymore. I was working to build a fortress around my son. I finished my online degree in computer science. I started entering coding competitions under a fake name, The Mechanic. I won the first one, then the second, then the third. A venture capitalist in California noticed my work. He sent me an email. "Your logic is the most elegant I've seen in a decade. Who are you?" I replied. "I'm the person you've been looking for." 2 years later, I sold my first piece of software for $3 million. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't buy a sports car. I bought a small, high-tech office and hired 10 of the smartest people I knew. I named the company BrightTech, after the light in Leo's eyes. By the time Leo was 4, I was one of the most successful women in the tech industry. I moved into a penthouse. I wore silk and steel. I was no longer the girl who was left at the altar. I was the woman people were afraid to cross. But every night I would sit by Leo's bed and watch him sleep. He was the only person who knew the real Lily. To the world, I was a cold CEO. To him, I was just mommy. And then came the Gala. And then came the ghost of my past. The city of San Francisco was a sea of lights beneath the glass windows of the grand ballroom. This was the National Tech Excellence Gala. 5 years ago, I was scrubbing the floors of a gym. Tonight, I was the guest of honor. I stood in front of the mirror in my dressing room. I was wearing a dress made of midnight blue silk. It was simple, elegant, and looked like it cost more than my father's mechanic shop, because it did. I had spent an hour having my hair done in a sharp, professional bun. My makeup was perfect. I looked like a woman who had never known hunger. I looked like a woman who had never cried over a man. "You ready, boss?" my assistant Sarah asked. She was holding my tablet. "The press is waiting. Everyone wants to know how a nobody from Oak Creek built the most successful AI company in the country." "I'm ready," I said, my voice steady. I walked into the ballroom. The flash bulbs of the cameras were like tiny explosions. I smiled, shook hands, and talked about innovation and future growth. But inside, I felt like I was wearing a mask. I was still Lily. I still remembered the smell of the church in Oak Creek. And then I saw him. He was standing across the room near the champagne fountain. He hadn't changed much, but the city had polished him. His hair was perfectly styled, and he was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost $10,000. He looked powerful. He looked like the man he had always wanted to be. Next to him was Vanessa. She was tall, blonde, and wore a yellow dress that screamed for attention. She was clinging to his arm, whispering in his ear. My heart hammered against my ribs. For a second, I wanted to turn around and run. I wanted to hide in the kitchen like a mechanic's daughter. But then I felt the weight of the key to my penthouse in my clutch bag. I remembered Leo's face. I didn't run. I walked straight toward them. Mark was laughing at something a businessman said. Then he turned his head. His eyes met mine. The laughter died instantly. His face went from a healthy tan to a sickly white. The glass of champagne in his hand shook so hard that the liquid spilled onto his expensive sleeve. "Lily," he gasped. His voice was a whisper, but in my head it sounded like a scream. "Lily?" Vanessa repeated, her eyes narrowing. She looked at me, then at Mark. "Who is this, darling? One of your old friends from that little village?" I smiled. It was the coldest smile I had ever practiced. "My name is Lily Miller. I am the CEO of BrightTech, and we are not friends." Mark couldn't speak. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. He looked at my dress, my diamonds, and the way the other billionaires in the room were watching me with respect. "I heard about BrightTech," Mark finally managed to say. "I saw the name The Mechanic on the patents. I never imagined it was you." That's the problem, Mark, I said, stepping closer so only he could hear me. You never had an imagination. You only had greed. I turned to walk away, but Vanessa stepped in front of me. Wait, Miller? I remember that name. Mark told me about a girl in his hometown. A little tragedy. Did you finally find a man to pay for your life, or did you just get lucky with a lawsuit? The room went quiet. People were starting to watch. Mark grabbed Vanessa's arm. Vanessa, stop, let's go. Why? Vanessa laughed, her voice loud and sharp. I want to know how the girl from the garage ended up here. I looked Vanessa in the eye. I ended up here because when your darling Mark left me at the altar, he gave me the best gift a woman can receive. The realization that I didn't need a coward to help me succeed. I built this company with my own brain and my own hands, hands that know how to work, unlike yours. The crowd gasped. Mark looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him. I walked away, my heels clicking on the marble floor. I didn't look back. I felt like I had won, but when I got into my car, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. Chapter 6. The First Rain. The next day, I tried to focus on work. I had a meeting with investors, a software launch to manage, and Leo's school play to attend. I tried to bury the memory of Mark's face in my spreadsheets, but at 6 p.m. my receptionist called. Miss Miller, there's a man here. He says he's an old friend. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's a matter of life and death. Tell him I'm busy, I said. He says his name is Mark, the receptionist added. I stayed silent for a long time. My first instinct was to have security throw him out, but a small, dark part of me wanted to see him suffer. I wanted to hear what he had to say now that the power dynamic had flipped. Send him in, I said. Mark walked into my office. He didn't look like the confident man from the Gala. He looked exhausted. His eyes were red, and he wasn't wearing his expensive jacket. Lily, he started. Sit down, Mark, I said, not looking up from my monitor. You have 5 minutes. I have a very busy life. He sat on the edge of the leather chair. I went back. After the gala, I went back to Oak Creek. I talked to my brother, Toby. I froze. Toby was the only person who knew the truth. I had sent Toby a picture of Leo once, a year ago, with a note saying, "He's happy. Don't tell Mark." Toby told me everything, Lily, Mark said, his voice cracking. He showed me the photo. He told me about the boarding house in Seattle. He told me you did it all alone. I finally looked at him. I didn't have a choice, Mark. You left. Remember? You had a career to build. I was a child, he shouted, then immediately lowered his voice. I was a fool, Vanessa's father. He promised me the world, but it was a trap. I've spent 5 years being their puppet. I sign what they tell me to sign. I go where they tell me to go. I thought I was winning, but I was just losing myself. And now that they are losing money, you want to come back to the mechanic's daughter? I asked. No, he stood up. I don't care about the money. I don't care about BrightTech. I want to see my son. I have a son, Lily. I have a 4-year-old boy I've never held. Why didn't you tell me? I stood up too. My desk was the only thing between us. Tell you? To what end? So you could tell me he was a trap too? So you could offer me money to go away? I saved him from you, Mark. I gave him a life where he will never feel like he isn't enough. I want to see him, he begged. Please, I'll do anything. Anything? I asked. Fine. Go back to your billionaire life. Stay away from us. That is what I want. I can't do that, he said. I'm leaving them. I'm resigning today. I'm giving back the car, the house, the stocks. I'm starting over. I'll stay in this city and work as a janitor if I have to, just to be near him." "Then start working," I said, "because you aren't getting anywhere near my son today." I thought he was lying. I thought he would go back to Vanessa and her father's law firm. But a week later, Sarah walked into my office. "Boss, you might want to see this." She pointed out the window. My office overlooked a small, beautiful park where I often took Leo to play after school. There, on a wooden bench, sat Mark. He was wearing an old t-shirt and jeans. He had a coffee in his hand and a book on his lap. He wasn't doing anything. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't holding a sign. He was just there. "He's been there since 8 a.m., Sarah said. "The security guards talked to him. He told them he's just enjoying the view." I watched him for a long time. Every day for the next month, Mark was there. If it rained, he wore a yellow raincoat. If it was hot, he sat in the shade. He never approached my building. He never tried to follow my car. One Friday, I was walking Leo to the car. Leo is a curious boy. He saw the man on the bench and stopped. "Mommy, why is that man always reading that book?" Leo asked. I looked at Mark. He had seen us. He closed his book and stood up. He didn't move toward us. He just stood there, his hands in his pockets, looking at Leo with an expression so full of pain and love that it made my throat ache. "He's just waiting for something, Leo," I said. "Is he waiting for a friend?" Leo asked. "I think he's waiting for a miracle," I replied. That night, it started to pour. A classic San Francisco storm. I looked out my window at 10 p.m. The park was dark and empty except for one figure and the bench. Mark was sitting there, soaked to the bone, his head in his hands. He didn't move. He looked like a statue of regret. I turned away from the window. I told myself I didn't care. I told myself he deserved to be cold. But I couldn't sleep. The silence of the penthouse felt too heavy. I kept thinking about the boy who used to share his sandwiches with me. At midnight, I grabbed an umbrella and a thermos of hot tea. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew I couldn't watch a man break into pieces in front of my eyes. The wind was screaming against the glass of my penthouse as I stepped out onto the sidewalk. The rain wasn't just falling. It was attacking the city. I crossed the street, my heels splashing in the deep puddles until I reached the park bench. Mark didn't even look up when I approached. He was shivering so violently that the wooden slats of the bench were rattling. He looked small. For the first time since I had known him, the Ice King ambition was completely gone. I held the umbrella over him, shielding him from the freezing downpour. "You're going to get pneumonia, Mark. This isn't Oak Creek. You can't survive a night out here in this weather." He slowly raised his head. His skin was gray and his blue eyes were bloodshot. He didn't look at the umbrella. He looked at me like I was a dream he was afraid to wake up from. "I don't care about the cold, Lily," he whispered, his teeth chattering. "The cold inside me is much worse. I've lived in that cold for 5 years. "Drink this," I said, handing him the thermos. He took it with shaking hands. He took a sip of the hot tea, and a little color returned to his face. "Why are you out here? You should be in your warm home with our son." "He's my son, Mark. Don't forget that." "I know," he said, bowing his head. "I know I have no right to that word. I gave up that right the moment I got on that bus. But Lily, seeing him from across the street today, it changed everything. I see your strength in him. I see the way he looks at the world. I want to know him. Not as a billionaire's son, just as a boy.
And what about Vanessa? What about your career?
Mark let out a bitter laugh. I walked into the office this morning and handed in my keys. Vanessa's father threatened to ruin me. He said I'll never work in law or finance again. He said I'll be a nobody. Mark looked up at me and smiled a real sad smile. I told him I was already a nobody. I've been a nobody since the day I left you. I stayed silent for a long time. The rain drummed against the umbrella.
Where are you staying?
A hostel near the docks, he said. It's not much, but it's clean. I got a job, Lily, not at a law firm. I'm working at the shipping yard. I'm moving crates. My hands are finally starting to look like my father's again. I looked at his hands. They were covered in small cuts and bruises. The soft, pampered hands of the city lawyer were gone. Go home, Mark, I said softly. I'm not ready to forgive you. Maybe I'll never be ready, but I don't want my son's father to die of a fever in a park. The next few months were a strange time of transition. Mark didn't stop showing up, but he changed his approach. He didn't sit on the bench anymore. Instead, he began to do things. One morning, I arrived at my office to find that the broken fountain in the lobby, which the building manager had ignored for months, was suddenly working perfectly. The next day, the squeaky door to the employee break room was silent. "Who is doing these repairs?" I asked Sarah. "It's a new handyman," she said, her eyes twinkling. "He works for free in the mornings before his shift at the docks. He says he just likes to keep busy. He's very quiet, very professional." I knew exactly who it was. I started seeing him in the background of my life. He would be fixing a light in the hallway as I walked to a meeting. He would be weeding the flower beds outside Leo's preschool. He never spoke to me. He never asked for a thank you. He was like a ghost, fixing the world I lived in. One Saturday, I was at the park with Leo. I was trying to teach him how to ride his bike, but he kept falling. He was frustrated and I was exhausted. "I can't do it, Mommy," Leo cried, sitting on the grass. "The bike hates me." "The bike doesn't hate you, Leo. You just need to find your balance." Suddenly, a shadow fell over us. It was Mark. He was wearing his work clothes, his face smudged with grease. "Excuse me, Miss Miller," he said, his voice humble. "If you lower the seat by just 2 inches, his center of gravity will be better. It's a trick my dad taught me." I hesitated. My heart told me to tell him to leave, but I saw Leo looking at him with curious eyes. "Go ahead," I said. Mark knelt in the dirt. He pulled a small wrench from his pocket and adjusted the seat. Then he looked at Leo. "You want to try now, buddy? I'll hold the back of the seat. I promise I won't let go until you tell me to." Leo looked at me for permission. I nodded. For the next hour, I watched from the bench. I watched the man who had abandoned me at the altar running alongside my son. I watched him patient and focused, his eyes never leaving Leo's face. When Leo finally pedaled on his own, Mark didn't cheer for himself. He stood back and let Leo run to me. "Mommy, I did it, did you see?" "I saw, Leo, I saw." Mark stood 10 feet away, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He looked at me, and for a split second, I saw the boy from Oak Creek. "He's a fast learner," Mark said, just like his mother. "Thank you, Mark," I said. It was the first time I had used his name without venom. But life is never just about forgiveness. It is also about consequences. While Mark was trying to rebuild his soul, Vanessa and her father were building a weapon. They didn't just want Mark back. They wanted to destroy me for stealing him. One Tuesday afternoon, the sirens of the business world began to wail. BrightTech was under attack. "Boss, we have a problem," Sarah said, running into my office. "A lawsuit was filed 10 minutes ago. It's Vanessa's father. He's claiming that our core AI code was stolen from his firm's proprietary research. He has witnesses and documents that say you worked for them as a secret consultant." "That's a lie," I shouted. "I've never even been in their building." "It doesn't matter if it's a lie," Sarah said, her face pale. "He's a powerful lawyer. He's frozen our bank accounts until the investigation is over. We can't pay our employees. We can't keep the servers running. If we go dark for even 48 hours, the company will collapse." I felt the room spin. Everything I had built, the fortress for Leo, the legacy for my parents, was being torn down by the man Mark had chosen over me. "I need a lawyer," I said. "The best in the city." "No lawyer will take the case," Sarah whispered. "Vanessa's father has influenced every major firm. They're afraid of him." I sat at my desk and put my head in my hands. I felt like the mechanic's daughter again, helpless and small. Then the door to my office opened. It wasn't a lawyer, it wasn't a security guard, it was Mark. He was wearing his suit, the one from the Gala, but it was wrinkled and he looked like he had been running. "I heard," he said, out of breath. "I saw the news on the docks." "Get out, Mark," I said, my voice breaking. "Your people did this. Your family is destroying my life again." "They aren't my people," Mark said, walking to my desk. He looked more determined than I had ever seen him, and I'm the only one who can stop them. "How? You're a handyman. You're a crate mover." "I'm also the man who signed the contracts for their firm for 5 years, Mark said. "I know where the skeletons are buried, Lily. I know about the illegal offshore accounts Vanessa's father uses to hide his clients' money. I have the digital keys. I kept them, just in case." He leaned over the desk. "They want to play dirty? Fine. I'll burn their whole world down to save yours." "Why would you do that?" I asked. "You'll go to jail for taking those files. You'll lose everything." Mark looked at me, and his green eyes were filled with a peace I didn't understand. "I've already lost everything that mattered, Lily. This time I'm doing it for the right reasons. For you, for Leo, for the mechanic's daughter who proved everyone wrong." The office was silent, lit only by the blue glow of 4 different computer monitors. Mark was hunched over the keyboard, his fingers moving with a frantic, desperate speed. I stood behind him, watching lines of code and encrypted file names scroll past. This was the digital heart of the Blackwood law firm, the empire Mark had once called home. "If I do this, Lily," Mark whispered, his eyes never leaving the screen, "there's no going back. Once I upload these documents to the Federal Trade Commission, my career is dead. I'll likely face charges for unauthorized access. I'll never be a lawyer again." "Mark, you don't have to," I said, my hand hovering over his shoulder but not quite touching him. "We can find another way." He stopped typing and turned to look at me. The shadows under his eyes were deep, but his gaze was clear. "There is no other way. They are going to destroy BrightTech tomorrow morning. They want to take your life's work to punish me. I won't let them. This is the only way I can truly protect you." With a single heavy click of the mouse, he sent the files. "It's done," he said, leaning back and exhaling a breath he seemed to have been holding for 5 years. The evidence of their fraud is in the hands of the government now. They'll be too busy defending themselves to worry about your company." We sat in the silence for a long time. The city outside was starting to wake up, the sky turning a pale, dusty pink. "Why did you really leave that day, Mark?" I asked softly. "In the church. Was it really just the money?" Mark looked at his hands, the hands that were now rough and scarred from the shipyard. "I was terrified, Lily. I looked at your dad, and I saw a man who worked 12 hours a day just to buy a steak on Sundays. I looked at our town, and I felt like the walls were closing in. I thought if I didn't leave then, I would become bitter and angry, and I would end up hurting you anyway. I thought I was saving us by becoming rich. I was a coward who dressed his fear up as ambition." He stood up and grabbed his jacket. "The police will probably be at my hostel by noon. I should go." "Mark," I called out as he reached the door. "Thank you." He didn't turn around. He just nodded once and disappeared into the hallway. The explosion was immediate. By 9 a.m., the news was everywhere. Vanessa's father had been taken from his office in handcuffs. The stolen code lawsuit against BrightTech was dropped instantly as the firm's credibility vanished. Vanessa was seen on television, shielding her face from cameras, her yellow dress life falling apart around her. I was back in control. My accounts were unfrozen. My employees were cheering. I had won. But I couldn't celebrate. I kept thinking about the nobody who had saved me. I drove to the police station that evening. I found Mark sitting on a wooden bench in the waiting area. He hadn't been arrested yet, but he had spent the day giving his statement to the investigators. He looked smaller than ever, his spirit exhausted. "They aren't going to charge you," I said, sitting down next to him. He looked up, surprised. "What?" "The government is calling you a whistleblower because the information you gave exposed a multi-million-dollar fraud. They are offering you immunity. You won't go to jail, Mark." He didn't cheer. He just closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the wall. "It doesn't matter. I'm still the man who left you. I'm still the man who missed 4 years of his son's life." "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "You are, and you can't change the past, but you can change the next 40 years. 1 year later. The air in Oak Creek was sweet with the smell of cut grass and blooming honeysuckle. I stood on the porch of the house I had bought for my parents, the biggest house in town, but one that still felt like a home. In the backyard, a small, dark-haired boy was running through a sprinkler, screaming with pure, unadulterated joy. "Careful, Leo!" a man's voice called out. Mark was sitting on the grass, putting the finishing touches on a wooden birdhouse. He was wearing an old flannel shirt and jeans. He didn't work at a law firm anymore. He had opened a small furniture restoration shop in the city. He worked with wood and lacquer, creating things that were meant to last. He didn't live with us. Not yet. He lived in a small apartment nearby and came over for dinner 4 nights a week. He was earning his way back, 1 day at a time, 1 conversation at a time. I walked down the steps and sat on the grass next to him. "He's getting tall," Mark said, watching Leo. "He has your height," I replied, "and your stubbornness." Mark laughed softly. He reached out, and for the first time in years, he didn't hesitate. He took my hand. His skin was warm and rough, a worker's hand. "I don't deserve this, Lily," he whispered. "I know I don't." "No," I said, looking at our son, "you don't. Love isn't about what we deserve, Mark. It's about what we are willing to build after everything else has burned down. I leaned my head on his shoulder. The stone in my heart was gone, replaced by something softer, something that felt like hope. We weren't the kids from the oak tree anymore. We were people who had been broken and put back together, and sometimes the cracks are where the light gets in. "Mommy! Daddy! Look at the frog!" Leo shouted, pointing at the grass. Mark stood up, pulling me with him. "Let's go see the frog, Leo." We walked toward our son, hand in hand, leaving the shadows of the past behind us in the tall green grass. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel Storyline English, and turn on notifications to receive more emotional English learning stories in the future.